Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are so glad to have you with us. Today, we're going to set the time circuits back to a very specific, very atmospheric moment in history.
Oh, I like this.
We are heading to October 26, 1964.
A Monday night.
Exactly, a Monday night in Elmira, New York. And I want you to just, close your eyes for a second and try to feel the vibe of that specific night.
Okay.
You can almost feel that late October chill in the air, right? Halloween is just around the corner, just a few days away. The leaves are all down. They're scratching across the pavement. It's just that time of year.
The veil feels a little thin.
It really does. It's the perfect setting for a ghost story.
It absolutely is.
And inside a quiet living room, you have Jane Roberts and her husband, Ruburt. And they're sitting down for what is a massive milestone.
No.
This isn't just another night at the Ouija board.
No, this is a significant one. This is session 100.
The centennial session.
The centennial session of the Seth material, yeah. We're looking specifically at the early sessions.
Sure.
Book 3, which is published by New Awareness Network.
And we should say right up front that this deep dive is going to be distributed free of charge on all major platforms, and it's for educational purposes.
Right.
We're here to learn, we're here to explore, and maybe get a little bit creeped out along the way.
I think that's a given with this one.
And today, the lesson plan is, well, it's a strange cocktail. It's got a little bit of everything.
It really does.
There's some really deep philosophy in here about the makeup of your own mind, of the ego.
Definitely. Very profound stuff.
But then it also has this very domestic mystery involving a lost heater part, a thermostat cover, to be precise.
Oracle's right. From the profound to the mundane.
And then on top of all that, a genuinely chilling ghost story that might make you think twice before you, wish to see an apparition.
It really runs the gamut.
Yeah.
That's what's so compelling about this session in particular. You have Seth, this non-physical personality or energy essence that's being channeled through Jane Roberts. And he's marking this 100th session with what he explicitly calls smug satisfaction.
I just love that. A ghost or, an energy personality feeling smug. It just totally breaks the mold of the stoic, all-knowing spirit guide you see in the movies.
It really does. It humanizes the connection, doesn't it? It shows personality.
Yeah.
But I think, broadly, our mission today is to look at how the unknown just intersects with our daily lives.
Right.
Sometimes that intersection is profound, dealing with the nature of the ego. And sometimes it's just about finding a lost thermostat cover that someone kicked under a car seat.
So grab your flashlight, maybe pull the blanket up a little tighter, and let's unpack session 100.
Let's do it.
Okay, so set the scene for us. It's 9:00 p.m. Jane and Rob have just come back from dinner with their friends, the Spazianis, and you should keep that name in mind, the Spazianis, because they are going to be center stage for the ghost story that's coming up later.
Right, they're key to this.
So they're back home. Jane starts to feel that familiar shift. Her eyes go dark, her voice changes, and Seth comes through, and right away, he's in a celebratory mood.
He is. He acknowledges the milestone immediately. He says, I am indeed aware that it is our 100th session. And Rob notes that Jane, while she's channeling, is smiling broadly and just pacing around the room.
It's a victory lap.
In a way, yeah. You have to remember, when they started this whole thing in late 1963, they had no idea if it would work or if it was safe or even where it was going.
Right.
Seth says something quite funny here. He notes that he's rather dusty this evening because he's so relaxed.
Dusty. I wonder what that even means for a non-physical entity. Is that like spiritual cobwebs? Or just feeling lazy?
I think he just means he's metaphorically kicking his feet up. He says he comes with a smug satisfaction in having survived 100 sessions. And you may feel a smug satisfaction also.
And he's quick to point out that it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't just a walk in the park to get here.
Oh, not at all. He calls it no small feat. He talks about the maintenance of overall equilibrium. And that's a really key point to start with. Seth isn't just, dumping information into Jane's head. He's carefully managing the psychological load on her and on Rob. He says the early stages were crucial to develop their psychic abilities without breaking their mental stability.
Which leads us right into the first big, meaty topic of the night.
It does.
The Undiscovered Man. Rib had been writing an introduction to their material, and he used this phrase, and Seth he really latched onto it.
Yeah, he loves this term, the undiscovered man. He says it refers to the whole self, the parts of us that are usually hidden beneath the surface of our daily lives.
And the mission of these sessions is to bring that stuff to light.
Exactly, to bring those vast, unknown areas of the self into the light of consciousness.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me. I feel like a lot of spiritual teachings I've come across, they sort of treat the ego like the bad guy.
Oh, absolutely.
You know the type, right? Kill the ego, transcend the ego. The ego is the enemy. It always feels like the ego is this villain we have to defeat to become spiritual.
Right, like it's an obstacle.
Exactly. But Seth takes a totally different stance here.
He does. And it's such a refreshing and nuanced take.
Mm.
Seth argues for balance. He says, and this is a direct quote, "We are not attempting to enlighten the intuitions at the expense of the intellect."
That is a crucial distinction.
It really is. He wants the intuitional inner self to hand knowledge over to the intellect, not to, bypass it or run it over.
Right.
And he uses this great explanation of the ego. He calls it a necessary protector.
A protector. So not a prison guard, but maybe more like a bouncer.
The bouncer is a great analogy.
Yeah.
Imagine the ego is the bouncer at the nightclub of your consciousness. Its job is to keep things orderly so you can function in the physical world.
Drive a car, pay your taxes, hold a conversation.
All of that stuff. So if you try to rush the door, if you try to force these massive psychic realizations or these intuitions past the bouncer by force, what is that bouncer going to do?
He's going to panic. He's going to lock the doors, call for backup, and start throwing people out.
Exactly. Seth says the ego's barriers should not be lowered by force or pressure. If the ego feels threatened, it fights back. It has to, because it fears for its own survival. It's thinking, if I let all this huge, chaotic reality in, I'm going to dissolve.
And you need an ego to survive in the physical world.
You do. You can't function without it. So the strategy isn't to fight the ego, but to, what? Reassure it. Make friends with the bouncer.
Yeah, buy him a drink.
Precisely. Seth says the ego must first feel secure and become flexible. You have to show the ego that this new information, these psychic insights, these intuitions, they aren't a threat.
So the intellect sort of vouches for the new information.
Yes. The intellect processes the data, and then it informs the ego, hey, this is okay. We're safe. This isn't chaos. It's just more information. And then the ego relaxes and it cooperates.
Sure.
The bouncer lets the new guests in because he knows they won't wreck the place.
It's about integration, not destruction. And that makes so much sense. It really explains why some people who dive too deep, too fast into psychedelics or even some intense meditation practices, why they sometimes have those bad trips or psychotic breaks. Their ego bouncer panicked.
That is exactly what Seth is warning against here. In fact, he brings up a very specific example concerning Jane.
Right.
Apparently, back in May of that year, this was session 54, Jane had been experimenting with what she called ecstasy states.
Ecstasy states. That sounds intense. Was she taking anything?
No, this was purely through focus and meditation. She was managing to achieve these states of intensely focused inner energy, but she was doing it very early in her training.
And Seth was worried.
He was. He had actually warned her to slow down. He said, and I'm quoting again, "I did not realize Jane would achieve this focusing of inner energy so early."
Why was he worried, though? Was it dangerous?
Well, not that the energy itself is evil or anything like that. Seth is very clear. He says this isn't shades of witchcraft. He says any energy can be used for almost any purpose. Think of it like electricity.
Right. It can light your home, but it can also electrocute you if the wiring isn't up to code.
That's the perfect way to put it. The danger was that she had this massive cannon of raw energy, but she didn't have the aim or the discipline for it yet. So if she unwittingly directed that energy at someone else while she was in a volatile state, it could have some unpleasant effects.
Like leaving a loaded gun on the coffee table.
Exactly. But now, by session 100, Seth is saying she's ready, the balance is there, her ego is secure enough to handle it. He says Ruburt now can allow himself some additional freedom.
Ruburt being his name for Jane.
Yes. It's nice to get that report card. You've passed the safety course. Now you can use the power tools.
It really is a testament to the methodical way they approached all this. They weren't just thrill-seeking. They were building a foundation.
A very solid foundation. And that foundation is what allows them to pivot between the profound and the utterly mundane.
Speaking of foundations and basements and mundane things, let's pivot.
Chuckles, let's.
Because right in the middle of this high-level talk about the nature of the soul and the structure of the ego, we get the mystery of the missing thermostat cover.
This is one of my absolute favorite parts of the early sessions. It just grounds everything so wonderfully.
So for our listeners, here's the setup. Jimmy Spaziani, their friend and their landlord, has a problem. The furnace in the apartment building is acting up. There's a thermostat in the hallway, but the cover is missing.
And Jimmy is worried people are going to start fiddling with the delicate mechanism inside. He knows he lost the cover months ago, but he just cannot find it anywhere.
So at dinner, he asks Jane and Rob, "Hey, can you ask the all-knowing cosmic entity where I put my plastic cover?"
It's just such a human thing to do.
It's hilarious. "I know you're explaining the secrets of the universe, but can you help me find my keys?" And Seth, he actually answers.
He does. He doesn't say, "I am above such petty material concerns." He interrupts his own lecture on the ego to give what is essentially a crime scene report.
Let's get into the details here because they're weirdly specific. What does Seth say?
Okay, so Seth says that Jimmy intended to put it on a shelf in the cellar. That was the plan. But he didn't. Instead, he shoved it in with some other metal objects.
Uh-oh.
And here's the kicker. Seth says it ended up on the floor of his Jeep with or underneath some rubbish.
The Jeep, of course.
But wait, it gets worse for poor Jimmy. Seth then says it was dumped either someplace on his own property or in a public dumping area, whichever area is by a hill, and it is still there.
Oh, no. So he threw it out.
By accident. Seth even gives a timeline for it. He says there were 2 occasions. First, he threw it in the Jeep and just forgot about it. Then, about 3 weeks later, and Seth thinks this was early in spring, he cleaned out the Jeep and dumped all the rubbish.
I love the image of this. You have this profound voice of wisdom coming through Jane Roberts, basically saying, "Jimmy, you're messy. You threw it in the dump."
It's so funny, but there's a really deep point here. Why does Seth bother with this? Why does he care about a thermostat cover?
Validation.
Exactly. It validates the connection. It proves that these inner senses that Jane is using can perceive physical matter across time and space.
Right.
I mean, if Seth can see a tiny thermostat cover buried in a dump from 6 months ago, something Jane and Rob couldn't possibly know, it lends a massive amount of credibility to the things he says that you can't verify, like the nature of the
It's
soul.
a blind test. If he gets the thermostat right, maybe he's right about the ego, too.
Precisely. And it also shows that the physical and the non-physical are intimately connected. There isn't this big wall between spiritual stuff and thermostat stuff. It's all one reality.
Okay, so we've had the philosophy, we've had the comedy. Now, let's turn down the lights. Because this next part is why I mentioned Halloween at the top of the show. This is the Spaziani ghost story.
This is such a fascinating case study in how the living and the dead can interact. And it is, I think, arguably one of the most chilling sequences in the early books.
So Jimmy and his wife Marion had what they called a mutual experience. Let's break it down. It starts with Jimmy. It's early October 1964.
Right. Jimmy runs a supper club in Elmira. It's late, about 1:20 a.m. He's driving back from taking an employee home, and on his way, he stops at his mother's house
Why?
to drop off some fresh tomatoes.
So mundane, fresh tomatoes.
Life is usually mundane right before it gets weird. So his mother's house is dark, everyone's asleep, and his father, Jimmy's dad, had died just a few months before this. So Jimmy's standing there in the backyard, a place he's known his whole life. It's quiet, and he has a thought.
He makes a wish, basically.
Yes. He thinks to himself, if I could see my father's apparition, then I could tell Ma, and she'd feel a lot better. He's looking for comfort. He wants proof so he can soothe his grieving mother.
So he's standing there in the dark, in his dad's backyard, just waiting for a ghost.
Nothing happens.
Silence.
Absolute silence. He sees nothing. He hears nothing. Just the crickets, probably. So he's disappointed. He gets back in his Jeep and drives to his club. He gets there at about 1:30 a.m.
And then the phone rings.
It's his wife, Marion, and she is in a panic.
Because while Jimmy was standing in that backyard seeing absolutely nothing, Marion was at home, fast asleep.
Right. She'd gone to bed around midnight. She was out cold,
Yeah.
not dreaming, and then suddenly she is jolted awake by a voice.
Not a whisper, though.
No. She describes it as a thunderously loud voice that filled the entire room.
And what did this voice say?
It shouted, "Good night."
Good night. That is chilling.
Marion said she sat bolt upright in bed, fully awake, completely terrified. She said it wasn't a dream. It felt like thunder. And she recognized the voice instantly.
It was Jimmy's dad.
It was Jimmy's dead father.
Wow. So Jimmy asks for his dad at 1:20 a.m. And at almost that exact same moment, His sleeping wife gets shouted at by his dad.
They compared the times, and it matched up perfectly. Jimmy made the wish. Marion got the shout.
That is just wild. So, of course, they asked Seth, what happened? Was this real?
And Seth confirms it. He says the experience was a legitimate one.
Okay, so here's the million-dollar question. Jimmy is the one who asked. Jimmy is the son. Jimmy was awake and actively looking for it. Why did Marion get the message?
This is where Seth explains the mechanics of this stuff, and it's really instructive for anyone interested in psychic phenomena. He says it was a communication triangle.
A triangle?
You had the father, who's the sender, you had the son, who's the wisher, and you had the wife, Marion, who was the receiver.
Why was Marion the receiver?
Seth says Marion has strong intuitive abilities. But, and this is the absolute key, she's fearful of them. Her ego is very, very guarded when she's awake. She likes discipline, she likes control. So normally, she blocks this kind of stuff out.
But she was asleep.
Exactly. When you sleep, the ego's guard comes down, the bouncer takes a smoke break. So the channel was wide open. Jimmy's father couldn't get through to Jimmy, so he routed the signal through the open frequency.
Which was Marion's sleeping mind. But why couldn't he get through to Jimmy? I mean, Jimmy was literally asking for it.
That is exactly why. Seth implies that Jimmy was trying too hard.
Oh.
Conscious effort can sometimes create static. It's the law of reversed effort. The harder you try, the harder it gets. He was looking for visual apparition. He had a very specific expectation. I want to see Dad.
So he was so focused on seeing a ghost that he couldn't hear the ghost?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
His conscious mind was too active, too expectant, too tense. Marion was passive. She was a blank slate. So the energy just took the path of least resistance.
Good night. It's such a funny thing for a ghost to shout, though. It's almost like the dad was saying, okay, I'm here, stop worrying, now go to sleep.
Or maybe he was just signing off. But the volume, the thunderous nature of it, Seth says that often happens when a signal has to burst through a resistance barrier. It has to come in with a bang to get noticed.
Now, Seth says something really profound here about the relationship between the living and the dead. He talks about how we, the living, can actually be a problem for those who have passed on.
Yes. This is a very touching and, in a way, a somewhat sad insight. Seth says, the living, however, can within certain limits make it difficult for those personalities who are finished with the physical field.
How do we do that? By grieving too much.
It can be that, but it's more about emotional denial or holding really rigid beliefs. Seth says that resistance creates a blockage. If you absolutely refuse to believe they still exist, or if you hold on to them so tightly with your grief that you won't let them move on, it creates a kind of drag on them.
So it's almost like we're haunting them.
That's a really good way to look at it. Seth's core message here is that personality is never destroyed, but it needs to transform. It needs to move to the next state of being. And when we deny that, when we insist that dead is dead, we are essentially gaslighting the dead. We're denying their reality.
Seth has that great quote, mankind's insistence upon recognizing as alive only those personalities with which he deals in the physical field is a most limiting concept.
It's just provincial thinking. It's like standing in your living room and saying, if you aren't in this room, you don't exist. Seth is really urging us to broaden our definition of what it means to be alive.
There's also this little genetic footnote to the story, which I found fascinating. The Spaziani family, it seems like this kind of thing runs in their blood.
It seems to, yeah. Seth mentions the unusual circumstances in the family line, and he points out Jimmy's youngest son, JJ, who was 6 years old at the time.
The kid who looks exactly like Jimmy.
And exactly like the grandfather. Rob and Jane note in the session that the resemblance is uncanny. But more than that, Jimmy mentioned that when JJ was a toddler, he used to have invisible playmates.
Typical imaginary friend stuff.
Jimmy didn't seem to think so. The boy would describe people that Jimmy didn't know. Distinct personalities, not just generic friends. And Seth confirms that the boy is well endowed with already efficient inner senses.
Oh.
It suggests that the hardware for this kind of communication might be passed down, or at the very least the openness to it seems to run in families.
So you have the grandfather who shouts from the grave, the father who wishes for apparitions, the mother who acts as a receiver, and the son who talks to invisible people. The Spazianis were living in a very active house.
And yet they were running a supper club and dealing with broken furnaces and eating fresh tomatoes. It just loops right back to that whole undiscovered man idea. The psychic reality isn't happening on some mountaintop in Tibet. It's happening in a family home in upstate New York.
I love that. Okay, before we wrap this up, we have to check in on Jane and Rob's own personal homework. Because Seth isn't just solving mysteries for the neighbors, He's actively training Jane and Rob.
He is. They're continuing their psychological time experiments. This is a specific practice Seth taught them to switch their focus away from the physical world and toward that inner reality.
And Wright mentioned the specific sensation he keeps having during these, the stretching.
Yes. Rut describes a definite and durable feeling of stretching in my legs, as though a force was pulling at my feet.
That sounds kind of uncomfortable.
He actually calls it a thrilling sensation. It's a really common phenomenon in out-of-body or astral projection literature. That feeling of the astral body loosening from the physical one often feels like stretching or vibrating or pulling.
Jane, she's seeing things.
She is. She's
Yeah.
practicing visualization. She describes seeing apples.
Apples, again, very mundane.
But look at the progression. At first, she sees them in gray and violet, basically monochrome. She sees these close-up details. But then in her second attempt, she sees them in full color. She says she can see the grain of the board they're sitting on and the brushstrokes.
It's like her inner screen is upgrading from black and white to 4K definition.
That's a great way to put it. Seth is training her to use her inner senses, not just to imagine, but to perceive. He says these aren't just hallucinations, they are a discipline. She's learning to tune the receiver.
She also sees a mystery man, a guy with a cauliflower ear.
Yeah, a middle-aged man, reddish hair, cauliflower ears sitting at a table. She has no idea who he is. It's really a tease of remote viewing, of seeing a real person somewhere else in the world. They don't verify who it is in this session, but it shows that her scope is widening. She's not just hearing Seth. She's starting to see into other rooms, other places.
It really was a centennial celebration of all the weirdness they had unlocked so far.
Weirdness is one word for it. Expansion is another.
That's a better word. True. So let's bring this all home. We've covered a lot of ground in this hour. We've talked about the ego as a bouncer that needs a hug, not a punch.
Right.
We found out where Jimmy's thermostat cover went. Pro tip, check your local dumb.
Chuckles. Right.
And we heard the shout heard round the bedroom.
Good night.
What's the big takeaway for you from session 100?
For me, it all goes back to that smug satisfaction Seth mentioned at the beginning. The idea that exploring the unknown, the undiscovered man, is hard work. It requires balance. It requires bravery, especially when you're dealing with things that go bump or shout in the night. But it's normal. It's part of the human equipment.
And we shouldn't turn off that equipment just because we're afraid of what we might hear.
Exactly. Seth says, energy is never destroyed, only transformed. If we were all just personalized energy, then the connections between us living or dead, they're real. The static only comes when we try to deny it.
And maybe, just maybe, if we quiet down our conscious minds, stop trying so hard to see the ghost, we might just hear the message we've been waiting for.
Beautifully said.
Now, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, and I really hope it has, you don't have to stop here. There are literally thousands of pages of this material.
We can't encourage you enough to go to the source, read the books. This episode was based on the early sessions, book 3. You can find it, and a whole treasure trove of other Seth books at sethcenter.com for the early sessions.
That's sethcenter.com. Go there, support the Publisher New Awareness Network, and start your own deep dive. They are the ones who are keeping this material alive and available for all of us to discuss.
Absolutely. They do amazing work.
This deep dive was produced by Producer Name. And please remember, our discussion is for educational purposes, just trying to shed a little light on these fascinating historical records.
Indeed.
So, until next time, keep your thermostat covered, keep your ego secure but flexible, and listen for the whispers.
Or the shouts.
For the shouts. Good night.
Good night.